When two officers arrested her, they had no idea they'd face her again, this time in court, as the judge deciding their fate. It was a sunny afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado. The park was alive with the sound of children playing joggers pacing along the trail, and families picnicking under the shade of tall oak trees amid this bustling yet peaceful scene. A black woman sat on a bench near the pond, a thick hardcover book resting on her lap. Her name was Camille, a well-respected attorney taking a rare moment to escape her demanding schedule. She was immersed in her reading when the sharp screech of tires broke her concentration. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb, catching the attention of a few onlookers. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern, radiating authority. Their eyes immediately locked onto Camille. "The only person sitting alone in the vicinity, ma'am. May we speak with you for a moment?" One officer called out, his voice carrying an air of suspicion rather than concern. Camille glanced up from her book, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Of course," she replied, closing the book carefully. The second officer stepped closer. His tone clipped. "We got a call about some suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Camille raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. Suspicious activity. "I'm just sitting here reading." She held up the book as if to prove her point, but their scrutiny didn't waver. "Can we see some ID?" the first officer demanded. Her pulse quickened, but she remained composed. "I don't understand what's the reason for this." "It's routine," the second officer said. Though his tone implied otherwise, the small crowd that had gathered began to murmur. Some looked curious, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the imbalance in the interaction. Camille sighed and reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet as she handed over her driver's license. One officer took it, scanning the information with unnecessary intensity. "Camille Johnson," he read aloud, almost mockingly. "What's your business here?" "Miss Johnson." Camille inhaled deeply, trying to keep her patience intact. "I live in this city. I came here to enjoy the park. Is that a problem?" The officer's lips tightened. "We'll see." He handed her ID back, but instead of walking away, they continued to linger, asking questions that felt less like routine and more like an interrogation. "Do you always carry a book like that?" Around one officer sneered. "Are you alone here or waiting for someone?" The other added, his hand resting on his belt in an unmistakably deliberate gesture. Camille handled countless tense situations in courtrooms, but this was different. The power dynamic was stark, and their tone carried an edge she recognized all too well. Still, she chose her words carefully. "I'm not answering any more questions, unless you tell me what I'm being accused of," she said firmly. Her refusal seemed to trigger something in them. The first officer stepped forward. "Don't get smart with us," he snapped. "We're just doing our job and I know the law." Camille replied, her voice steady. "I'm not breaking it by sitting in a public park," but reason was not on their agenda. The first officer reached for her arm. "You're resisting," he said, though Camille hadn't moved. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, startled. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. A man pulled out his phone to record the scene. "Stop resisting," the officer repeated louder this time, as if performing for the growing audience. Camille's heart raced as she felt the cold metal of handcuffs snap around her wrists. She tried to stay calm, even as humiliation and frustration burned in her chest. The officers led her toward their cruiser, ignoring the questions from onlookers. Camille turned her head toward the crowd, locking eyes with a young woman holding up her phone for a moment. There was an unspoken exchange, a silent plea to document the injustice unfolding, but as the car door slammed shut, Camille knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Inside the cramped back seat of the police cruiser, Camille's mind raced. She had spent years defending clients, standing up for justice and navigating the legal system. But now she was on the other side of it. The absurdity of the situation struck her, but there was no humor in it. Only anger. The ride to the station was suffocatingly silent, save for the crackle of the police radio. Camille stared out the window, her reflection merging with the passing scenery. Her wrists ached from the cuffs digging into her skin at the station. Things only got worse. The booking process was invasive, humiliating, and designed to strip her of her dignity. She was fingerprinted, photographed in LED to a small holding cell with fluorescent lights that buzzed relentlessly. "Enjoy your stay," one of the officers said smugly as he shut the cell door. Camille sat on the cold bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She replayed the events at the park over and over in her mind. How had such a peaceful moment spiraled into this? The answer was as clear as it was. Bitter prejudice hours passed before anyone acknowledged her again. A young officer approached the cell, holding a clipboard. "Miss Johnson, you've been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer," he said flatly. "On what grounds?" Camille asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "You can discuss that in court," he replied before turning away. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think strategically. The charges were flimsy, and she knew it. But she also knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Cases like hers rarely were. Eventually, Camille was released on bail as she walked out of the station. The cool night air hit her like a wave. A stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. She spotted her colleague and friend Marissa waiting by the curb. Camille Marissa rushed over her face, a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" Camille nodded, though her body betrayed her with a slight tremor. "I'm fine," she said, though the word felt hollow as they drove away. Marissa kept glancing at her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, Camille broke the silence. "I'm not letting this slide." "Marissa, not this time." Marissa's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm tired of this happening." Camille replied, "I have the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back, and I will." That night, Camille sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and open books. She worked tirelessly, outlining a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and the department. Her hand shook, not from fear, but from a simmering determination. As the days turned into weeks, the community began to rally around her. The video of her arrest, shared by the young woman in the park, had gone viral. People from all walks of life reached out with messages of support, sharing their own stories of injustice. Camille's resolve grew stronger with every email, every phone call, every comment. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, humiliated, or dismissed. But even as she prepared for the courtroom battle, she couldn't predict the moment when justice would take an unexpected turn. The weeks following Camille's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and relentless work. Her law firm was initially hesitant, worried that her public case might overshadow their carefully cultivated reputation. But Camille didn't flinch. She explained calmly but firmly that this fight wasn't just about her. It was about setting a precedent. The viral video had done more than spread her story. It had sparked conversations across the city and beyond. The footage of Camille, calm yet defiant, as the officers forcibly led her away, became a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Reporters began calling, asking for interviews, but Camille turned them all down. She wasn't interested in media attention. Her focus was laser-sharp, building a case that would not only hold the officers accountable, but also expose the systemic flaws that allowed such behavior to persist at night. Though when the world went quiet, the weight of the situation crept in. She replayed the arrest in her mind, the dismissive tone, the handcuffs, the murmurs of the crowd. She thought about how easily things could have escalated further. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also fueled her determination. One evening, as she sifted through her research, Marissa stopped by with takeout. Camille barely looked up from her laptop as Marissa placed the food on the table. "You've been at this for hours," Marissa said gently. "I don't have a choice," Camille replied without missing a beat. Marissa sat across from her, studying her face. You know, this is bigger than just a legal battle. Right, people are looking to you now." Camille closed her laptop, finally meeting her friend's gaze. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "That's why I can't afford to lose." Her preparation was meticulous. She combed through similar cases, pulling precedents and gathering evidence to dismantle the officer's claims. She enlisted the help of trusted colleagues, building a legal team that shared her passion for justice. But it wasn't just about the courtroom. Camille also made it a point to engage with the community she attended, town halls, listened to others who had experienced similar injustices, and even spoke at a local college about the importance of accountability. One afternoon, while walking to her car, after a meeting, a stranger approached her. "Miss Johnson?" the woman asked hesitantly. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice cracking, "for standing up to them, for standing up for all of us." Camille felt her throat tighten. She managed a small smile. "I'm just doing what I can." The community's support was a double-edged sword. It empowered her, but it also heightened the pressure. She couldn't let them down. Then one day her attorney called with news the officer she was suing had filed a motion to dismiss the case. Camille expected as much. It was a standard move to delay the process. But as her attorney explained the next steps, she froze. "Camille," he said cautiously, "you should know something else. You've been assigned as the judge for one of their cases next month." The irony was staggering. Camille leaned back in her chair, processing the revelation. She had spent weeks preparing to fight these officers in court, and now fate had handed her an entirely different kind of justice. For a moment, she wondered if she could do it, if she could sit on that bench and remain impartial. But then she thought about everything they had. She reminded herself of the people depending on her to take a stand. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a chance to show what real justice looked like. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people filed in, finding their seats. The case itself wasn't particularly high profile. An internal misconduct hearing involving 2 officers accused of using excessive force in an unrelated incident. For most, it was just another day in the justice system. Officers Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, their uniforms like armor. They leaned toward each other, speaking in hushed tones, their expressions indifferent, almost bored. To them, this was routine, just another hurdle to clear, another case to dismiss. Then the door to the judge's chambers opened, and the room fell silent. Camille stepped out, her black robe flowing behind her. She moved with purpose, her expression calm yet commanding, as she took her seat on the bench. She glanced toward the defendants. The reaction was instant. Officer Carter's face went pale, his eyes widening in disbelief. Daniels shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. It was her, the woman they had arrested and humiliated in the park. Camille paused for a moment, letting the weight of recognition settle over the room. Then, in a clear and steady voice, she began. "This court is now in session. Please be seated." The officers sat stiffly, their composure cracking. Carter leaned over to whisper something to their lawyer, who simply nodded, eyes fixed on Camille. For the first time in weeks, Camille felt the upper hand. But this wasn't about revenge. Her role as a judge demanded fairness, and she intended to uphold that duty. Still, the irony of it all wasn't lost on anyone in the room. As the attorneys delivered their opening statements, Camille listened carefully, jotting notes. Every so often, her gaze would flicker toward the 2 officers. She noticed the tension in their posture, the subtle fidgeting of their hands. During a short recess, Carter and Daniels stepped into the hallway, their voices low and tense. "How the hell is she the judge?" Carter hissed, barely containing his frustration. "This has to be a setup," Daniels muttered, shaking his head. "It's not a setup," their lawyer cut in. "It's a coincidence. And you need to stay focused. She's not your enemy. Your actions are." But the officers weren't listening. They were too caught up in the surreal twist of fate. When court resumed, Camille remained composed, ensuring the hearing proceeded smoothly and fairly. Yet her very presence seemed to rattle the men who once saw her as powerless. Every time Camille addressed the defendants, they shifted in their seats, their confidence slowly unraveling. During one witness's testimony, she caught Carter stealing a glance at her. His expression wasn't defiant, it was closer to regret, as though he was beginning to grasp the seriousness of what they had done. By the end of the day, the tension in the courtroom was thick. Camille struck the gavel with a firm hand. "We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., she announced. As the room emptied, Camille remained at the bench, quietly organizing her notes. She could feel the weight of the officers' stares as they lingered near the exit, clearly debating whether to speak to her. In the end, they didn't. They walked out silently, their steps heavy with the realization that this was far from over. But for Camille, the challenge wasn't just the irony of the moment. It lay in the choices she would have to make next, and whether true justice could prevail. The courtroom was packed the next morning. News of the unexpected twist had spread, drawing a much larger crowd than usual for a misconduct hearing. Some came out of curiosity. Others came to support Camille, even though they knew her role as judge required strict neutrality. Camille entered with the same calm, composed demeanor. Her black robe flowed as she stepped up to the bench. The attorneys wasted no time getting started. The prosecutor began, presenting the evidence with precision. He called witnesses and detailed the excessive force incident. "Your Honor," he said, turning to Camille, "this wasn't a simple lapse in judgment. The officers' actions were a blatant abuse of power. Their behavior reveals a pattern of disregard for the very people they are sworn to protect." Camille nodded, absorbing every word. Her pen moved steadily across her notepad. She stayed focused, even as the defendants grew visibly uneasy under her gaze. Then the defense attorney stood. His voice was steady, but strained. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the unfortunate outcome of the incident, we argue that the situation escalated due to factors beyond the officers' control. Their actions were not driven by malice. We believe there is insufficient cause for punitive action." As the debate unfolded, Camille couldn't help but recognize the echoes of her own experience, the rationalizations, the deflections. It was all too familiar. Still, she pushed her emotions aside, determined to base her decisions only on facts. When it was time for cross-examinations, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew even more tense. The prosecutor called the victim to the stand, a young man named Ethan. His voice trembled as he described the night Ethan took a deep breath. "They tackled me to the ground during a routine traffic stop," he said, his voice unsteady. "They didn't even give me a chance to explain." His eyes flicked nervously between the attorneys and the officers. It felt like they'd already decided I was guilty before I even opened my mouth. The prosecutor leaned in. "And did you resist their commands at any point?" "No," Ethan replied firmly. "I was scared, but I did everything they told me. It didn't matter. They had already made up their minds." The room was silent as the defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He tried to cast doubt on Ethan's account, but the young man remained composed, answering with clarity and conviction. Camille observed closely, her face unreadable. Then came the moment everyone had been anticipating. The defendants were called to testify. Officer Carter was first. He looked visibly nervous as he took the stand, glancing briefly at Camille while swearing his oath. His voice trembled as he began answering the prosecutor's questions. "Officer Carter," the prosecutor began, "you're accused of using excessive force. Can you explain your actions that night?" Carter hesitated, his eyes flicking to Daniels before answering. I thought the situation was escalating. I made a judgment call." "And do you believe your actions were justified?" Carter shifted uncomfortably. At the time, yes, but looking back, I realize I could have handled it differently. Handled it differently how? The prosecutor pressed. By not tackling an unarmed, compliant individual to the ground. Carter opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His silence said more than any answer could. When Officer Daniels took the stand, his demeanor was equally strained. His explanations rang hollow, and rather than mitigating the damage, they only reinforced the prosecution's case. Camille listened closely, her expression neutral, though inside she felt a mix of frustration and sadness. These were men who had been entrusted with power, and had wielded it carelessly, leaving lasting harm behind. As the hearing continued, it became clear the evidence against the officers was overwhelming. The prosecutor's closing argument was compelling, urging the court to send a message. Abuse of authority would not be ignored. In contrast, the defense's closing remarks felt scattered, lacking conviction. Even the officers appeared resigned to the inevitable. Camille adjourned the hearing with a steady voice. This court will reconvene next week for the ruling. As the room emptied, Carter and Daniels lingered near the exit. Their faces were pale, their expressions hollow. For the first time, they seemed to fully grasp the seriousness of what they had done, and what was coming. But justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about accountability, about change, and about ensuring that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. The mistakes of the past must not be repeated. A week later, the courtroom was silent as Camille entered to deliver her ruling. Every seat was filled, the tension in the air almost tangible. Reporters lined the back wall, pens poised to capture every word. This was no longer just a case about two officers. It had become a symbol of a broader fight for justice and accountability. Camille's voice was calm but resolute as she began. The role of law enforcement is to protect and serve the community with integrity, respect, and fairness. When those entrusted with this responsibility abuse their power, it erodes public trust and causes harm far beyond the immediate victim. This case has laid bare the consequences of such actions. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the courtroom. At the defense table, Carter and Daniels sat with their heads bowed. The weight of her words was unmistakable. The evidence clearly shows that Officers Carter and Daniels used unnecessary force, violating the very protocols they swore to uphold. Their actions were not only unjustified, they revealed a troubling pattern that cannot be ignored. Camille then outlined the consequences. A mandatory suspension without pay, required participation in extensive retraining programs, and a permanent disciplinary mark on their professional records. Her ruling was firm, but fair, a balance of accountability and the opportunity for reform. With a final strike of the gavel, she closed the case. This court is adjourned. The officers rose, their expressions heavy with reflection. As they prepared to leave, Carter paused and turned back toward Camille. Your Honor, he said quietly, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. Camille gave a small nod, acknowledging the words without offering absolution. Real change, she knew, would come through action, not apologies. As the courtroom emptied, Camille remained seated, quietly reflecting. Justice had been served, but the victory felt bittersweet. For every case like this one, so many others remained unresolved, unheard. That evening, Camille attended a community meeting at a local recreation center. The room was full of people ready to share their stories, their pain, their hopes. As she listened, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. An elderly woman approached her afterward, her voice trembling. Thank you, she said, gripping Camille's hand tightly. What you did in that courtroom, it means the world to us. Camille smiled softly. This is just the beginning, she replied. There's still so much work to do. In the days that followed, real conversations began. Community leaders, activists, and law enforcement officials sat down together. Camille used her platform to push for reform, calling for transparency, accountability, and equity in policing. The case had sparked a ripple effect, not just in Fort Collins, but across the state. People were demanding change, fighting for policies grounded in fairness and equality. For Camille, this wasn't about personal vindication. It was about making sure others wouldn't have to go through what she did. The fight for justice was far from over. But moments like this reminded her that change, though often slow, was possible. One afternoon, she stood on the courthouse steps, watching a group of young activists gather peacefully. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The system wasn't perfect, but with enough voices it could be pushed in the right direction. And that, she thought, is the kind of justice worth fighting for. If you believe in the power of accountability and change, subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire action and reflection. Together, we can help build a fairer, more just world.